Thanks so much, Nipun. So we'll move to the next segment of our session, and I would like to invite up the other panelists. And the format's going to be very straightforward, so rather than spend a bunch of time introducing each one of them and giving you their bio, which you can read yourself, we'll have each of the panelists spend a few minutes telling us about their organization, what they do, and then we'll have a session where we'll have a discussion between all of us. So would like to introduce Ashok Gadgil, I think you're up next, who's a professor at UC Berkeley, and Ashok, thank you. So Ashok, come on up. John Goldstein, who's the co-founder and CEO of Imprint Capital. Leila Jana, who's the CEO of SamaSource, and that's it, right? And Nipun, yes, come on up. Thanks so much. Ashok, would love to start with you.
Sure. So my name is Ashok Gadgil, and so I'm professor of environmental engineering at UC Berkeley. I am a director of a division at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. The second part of the question is, what's the business? And the business is, in my case, figuring out how could we use technology invention, how could we leverage the science, which is at our fingertips here in the first world, to solve often desperate life and death problems of people at, say, the bottom 2 billion people at the bottom of the economic pyramid, who often don't have any formal education, who don't have access to the internet or Wikipedia, who don't know science and technology in the way for us is almost a throwaway knowledge, or it is throwaway knowledge. And that's what's exciting to me and to people who work with me, is the value it brings in terms of satisfaction of what difference one can make to the lives of people who often face very, very difficult challenges, which are kind of almost existence challenges.
Hi there, I'm Leila Jana. I'm the founder and CEO of a nonprofit social business called SamaSource, a new one called Sama Hope, and I'm a director at CARE, a large global humanitarian agency. And I suppose what drives me is an interest in the marriage of social justice and technology. And I'm particularly interested in using technology to level the playing field. I believe in meritocracy, but unfortunately, as Ashok mentioned, 1.4 billion people live on less than $1.25 a day. And by the way, that's adjusted for purchasing power. So that's 2005 US dollars. Imagine walking around on the street in Santa Clara in 2005 with $1.25 in your pocket. And that's what 1.4 billion of our fellow humans live on daily. So I'm really interested in ways to level the playing field given these massive inequities using technology. And I'll just tell you briefly what SamaSource and Sama Hope do. SamaSource is an outsourcing company that takes work from major technology companies, breaks it down into very small units, which we call micro work, puts it in a patented technology system that we developed to do this breaking down, and then we send the work to very low-income women and youth around the world. So we work with women and youth who've never had formal employment before, who are living in slums and villages in East Africa, in South Asia, in Haiti, and we just opened a pilot site in the Bayview district of San Francisco. We're very concerned with outcomes, not just outputs. So for us, impact is moving people over the poverty line. And we've moved 14,000 people over the poverty line since we started 4.5 years ago. About 3,500 workers, each supporting an average of 3.5 income dependents. Sama Hope is a venture that I started 2 years ago out of just necessity. Nobody was doing anything like this at the time. I was visiting Sierra Leone actually to look for SamaSource technology centers and realized pretty quickly that this is a country with 70% illiteracy, very little electricity outside of the big cities, and really not a location for the SamaSource model. And I ran into a doctor who was performing surgeries. He was performing fistula repair surgeries. I won't get into the details of that condition, but it's essentially incontinence. It's a condition that leads to incontinence for women that have problems in childbirth, and it's very prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa where women can't get to a hospital. So I was really struck by this problem of lack of acute care in very poor places. I had read about the Aravind model, which was discussed earlier, and I had this idea for a crowdsourcing site like Kiva, where we would crowdfund surgeries and medical treatments. And at the time, in 2011, nothing like this existed. I called my friends at Kiva. They said, you should just build it. So I did, and that's called Sama Hope. We just launched, and we funded 100 surgeries so far, including fistula repair surgeries, burn contracture release for people who suffer from burns, and most recently we introduced birth kits. And the hope is eventually to offer cataract surgeries as well. Thanks.
My name is John Goldstein. I'm with Imprint Capital, and so we make and manage investments either directly in social enterprises or in funds and other organizations that invest in them. So we've invested about $285 million in the sector, in the space, but across different areas, from education to energy and environment to poverty alleviation. To food, health, and well-being, and I think in some ways, building off your conversation, talking about the four-letter word, I guess we get to, I get to be the boring cufflink-wearing person that looks at the economics of love, and not in the sense of anything illicit or an online dating site, but really that question of these business models. How do you transform resources, financial, human, and other, to really drive impact? And sometimes that looks like a for-profit, sometimes it looks like a non-profit. And so some examples that we've been invested in, there's a company called Revolution Foods. 2 young women graduating from Berkeley Haas were determined to improve school food. School food in the United States. Low-income kids, school food represents 2/3 of the calories they get during a day. Really essential piece of their day, and often is horrible. So they started a business which a lot of people thought was a really nice little business when it started. Fast forward, they're serving 200,000 kids a day, 80% of whom are low income, helping to change the policy dynamic around and the market dynamic about what people expect in terms of school food, on the ground and in Washington, D.C. Recently closed an investment round led by Oak Investments, a very mainstream, investment firm. Wireless generation, 2 technologists were determined to bring technology into the classroom to help enable teachers. Fast forward, 3 million kids, 200,000 teachers served, and a $360 million exit for cash to News Corp later. Wireless generation has had a substantial impact. Sea Change Health. Former execs from the health insurance industry were frustrated with how things were being done and said, why don't we reinvent what health insurance should be? It should bribe you to be healthy. Not just process claims, not just collect, but actually try to drive better health in a way that's better business. Rapidly growing, having a lot of success. These things look a lot of different ways, but a couple commonalities across them. Number one, they tend to tackle big problems, which means they're big markets. Education, health, environment. These are big challenges, which means there's revenue there, there's opportunity. 2, what do great social enterprises have in common are generally great social entrepreneurs. And they look a lot of different ways, from sort of young idealistic people encountering a problem in reality. Shazi Visram, a young mom, couldn't find good food for her kids at the store and created a baby food company. Fast forward, just sold to Danone last Monday. After having built a real business. 2, the folks who started Sea Change are grizzled 30-year veterans of the insurance industry. There's not one image of what that great entrepreneur looks like. Great business model, and I think we'll get probably a lot into that later, but that question of how do you have a business model that allows you to fund and grow and reach a level of scale? And it doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. There's a lot of theology around that, and I think, so you talked about your friends at Kiva. They can explain exactly why they're a nonprofit and the dollars and cents and how that allows them to mobilize resources and advance their mission. And I think that thinking of transcending ideology and being pragmatic, and then ultimately, stakeholders. And this gets back to the economics of love, which is, there's a lot of benefit of actually doing something that people care about. It means you can often attract great talent that wants to work for those companies. It means your suppliers want to work with me. It means that stakeholders, government, others actually are rooting for you to succeed. And I'll end with Tabriz Verji, who runs a group called Uprising and has been a venture capitalist for a while. Did a quick study, looked at 7,061 investments made by 100 top venture capitalists, and he tried to sort out the impact-oriented companies. And out of those 7,000 somebody, he found 361, and he found that they had 3.7 times the Twitter followers of all the rest. That's love. That shows that they're able to mobilize attention and support. But why does that matter? Well, they also, on average, had twice the revenue, right? And so how this all fits together. So
we already heard from Nipun. So maybe I'll start with a question that's somewhat personal. So I would love to hear from each of you if there was this sort of epiphany or moment where you said, oh, this is what I want to be doing, in terms of where you want to spend your time, your expertise, and across this group, this epiphany may have come at different points. we've come at for different reasons. Would love to hear sort of how you, was there a moment where you said, this is where I want to spend my time, invest my resources, and how that happened? Maybe start with you.
Okay, so in my case, I mean, all my degrees are in physics. For me, I couldn't think about anything other than doing physics for a long time, and I came here to do my PhD in physics at UC Berkeley. And coming to the US was a huge shock to me because in some ways I discovered that Americans were putting more fertilizers on their front lawn than all of India was putting on its agriculture. And this is 1970s, where my parents were still waiting for a phone after 15 years of application for a landline. Here, the phone ownership was more than one per person, slightly, and so on. So prosperity was certainly possible, and it is not based on colonial exploitation of some other country. And it was use of innovative technologies and markets and so on. So it really shook me up, and I began asking, what is it that do I want to do? What do I want to do that's meaningful to me? Do I want to do general theory of relativity? That is what I was working on, which would be perhaps useful a few centuries, maybe not, we don't know for sure. And that's what made me switch fields to energy efficiency, then on to environmental engineering, applied to air pollution, safe drinking water, and things that matter to me. So there's the inside picture of, and what matters to me is the effect it has on potentially improving the lives of at least maybe 10 million or more if it actually succeeds in the real world. Now, when I think of some scale like this, I'm passionately convinced that love is not enough. I'm passionately convinced that however intensely I might have love for my fellow human beings, unless I figure out how not to be just pushing the noodle on the plate like many Deadwood academics do all their lives, I'm not going to make a big difference in the world. And that's highly wasteful of my one life I have on this planet. So I really worry about ignoring the other side of the coin. Love is, of course, sure, we should all have love. Who can fight against love? It's on the postage stamp of United States of America. Okay. So that part is good, but I really worry and passionately feel strongly about figuring out business models that can go to scale.
So I guess I had three different epiphanies leading me into the career that I have now. And I should mention that I only have one degree, and it's in the dismal science of economics. So my first epiphany happened before that. So when I was 16, my parents are Indian, but I was raised in the U.S., and so I have the experience that many first-generation Americans have of your parents always telling you about the struggles back home and forcing you to eat all the food on your plate because there are starving kids back in India. And really, until I was 17, that was my only real experience of extreme poverty, was hearing my parents talk about it. And I got a scholarship from, of all places, the Lorillard Tobacco Company when I was in high school. It was for 10 grand, and it was a big check in the mail, and I felt suddenly really guilty about using big tobacco money to fund my fancy college education. So I decided I would use the money to go and travel. And my high school guidance counselor said, you have enough credit, so why don't you graduate earlier, go have an adventure somewhere. And just to make things interesting, I chose the place that seemed farthest away in the world, which was Ghana in West Africa. And I found a program that would let me go to Ghana and work as a volunteer English teacher. So I thought at 17 that I'd go there and I'd save the world, I'd teach these poor, desperate children English. And of course I got there and the Ghanaians spoke better English than my high school peers. You know, people listened to Voice of America and BBC Radio. My students could name US senators. I mean, it was incredible. And I thought, here's this horrible myth about poverty that people aren't, smart enough or willing to work hard enough, and that's why they're poor. And in this country, which is so rich in human capital, it just doesn't make any sense to me that people are so badly off. And I became extremely curious about poverty because Ghana seemed to me much like India. It seemed like a place where there were, tons of bright people everywhere, just without access to opportunity. And so I became really interested in international development. I decided then that something needs to be done about this problem. It made no sense to me that the people around me were, I witnessed a little girl die in the village that I was staying in because her parents didn't have the $5 it would have cost to buy her malaria medication, and I got there too late. And I thought, this is, in the year 2000, this is unacceptable. If we've put a man on the moon, we can solve poverty. It doesn't seem to be like rocket science. So I've got to work on this. And I ended up studying development economics at Harvard, and unfortunately learned that we didn't have the answers there. I worked briefly at the World Bank and got even more depressed. Although now under Jim Kim, I think things are going to get better. So I graduated, and I decided to do management consulting for a couple of years to pay off some loans and also to understand business, because one thing that I learned spending a lot of time in developing countries working with NGOs is that really the best way to address the problem of poverty, I thought, was to provide living wage jobs to as many people as possible. And so I thought, let me understand how business works. So my big epiphany, my second big epiphany, happened after about 2 months on the job as a consultant. I was shipped off to India to go work for a giant outsourcing firm. And this is a firm, it's now in the top 10 of Indian BPOs. It's called WNS. And it had about 10,000 workers when I was there. And I was walking the call center floor one afternoon and ran into a guy who was from Dharavi, which is South Asia's largest slum. And I thought, wow, if this guy is from a slum and can take calls for British Airways, there's clearly something to this outsourcing thing, and maybe we can think about a way to move the outsourcing jobs just from the big cities into the places where poor people actually live. Maybe we can intentionally recruit poor people from slums and from villages to come and work in these call centers. And so that was the aha moment that eventually led to SamaSource. And now SamaSource has about 800 workers globally who do all sorts of data processing work for tech companies. And the third epiphany happened in 2011. As I mentioned, I was in Sierra Leone, and I ran into, in a rural hospital, this Western doctor who was doing fistula repair surgeries. And it was a similar kind of thing. I thought to myself, how is it that in 2011, in this country, in Sierra Leone, 1 in 8 women die in childbirth in their lifetimes? It's the highest rate of maternal mortality in the world, and it's unacceptable. I mean, we can put $400 million, into a tech company's marketing budget. That's the entire budget for the nation of Sierra Leone to function on. It's got 6 million people. So I figured, there's got to be a way to solve this problem, and what led to the founding of SamaHope was just this frustration that there was no way to fund these amazing surgeons like Dr. Maggi who are going abroad and doing these fistula repair surgeries. And I thought, surely there's a better way than them raising money from their local church or what have you. So those were my 3 epiphanies.
Thank you very much.
So I after university, I took what at the time was the path of least resistance and became a strategy consultant. And so it sounds an awful lot like school, right? You read stuff, you write stuff, no one's going to pay attention to it. It seems very similar. And then I went and I worked for a company started by George Soros' former chief political strategist called Medley Global Advisors. And we had the most expensive information service for global investors. Fascinating chance to see how the world of policy works, how markets work, and how they interact. And along the way, Richard, my business partner, had his old entanglements with interesting stuff around global development from his time with Soros. And Richard was really bad at showing up for meetings. And so I'd get a call at 11:30 in the morning saying, I'm supposed to go have lunch with the Canadian Prime Minister and the head of the UNDP in like 15 minutes. I don't want to go, so can you just go? And so I started showing up and learning about, as a consultant, you see industries and sectors that are inefficient and problems to be solved, and you try to solve them. And here you started to get a view that the systems and processes to solve problems that actually mattered were every bit as, shall we say, challenged as fixing an industry supply chain. And so I finally my little aha moment is I liked solving problems, and I finally discovered problems that mattered and that needed solving and were actually really interesting, meaningful problems. I think number 2 is once I started working on this was kind of on the side. So we had our business, we were growing, and we had this philanthropic institute. I sort of really saw 2 things in parallel. One is working on solving those problems, you had an awful lot of friends. You had people that wanted you to be successful in open, generative dialogue. People shared, people collaborated, people helped. Everyone wanted you to succeed. You wanted other people to succeed. And sometimes that meant asking tough questions. Sometimes that meant helping people out. But just that atmosphere, and my day job at that point transitioned to being COO for a hedge fund. And the contrast between those worlds and how happy and motivated and energized the people on the one side of my life were, and how sad and depressed these centimillionaires I was hanging out with were on this side of the world. It really was. There was just this moment of, what am I doing? You know, and I think the last part is less epiphany, but just once you find yourself working in this and you find your space, which could be anything, right? I'm the boring person. I don't actually get to be a great social entrepreneur, but I get to meet a lot of them and find them and hopefully help them. You know, people have lots of different ways to play. It's not everyone needs to go start their own social enterprise, but once you've been involved in that world, it's very hard to imagine going back. And that's less of an epiphany and more just sort of a realization.
Yeah, so I'm a product of the Silicon Valley. I grew up maybe less than a mile from here, went to school here. So this is home. In the late 90s, I got out of school at UC Berkeley. And like everyone else, you know, the sort of Silicon Valley dream was go out and make a lot of money, be very successful, and then, you know, go out and do some good work in the world. And there was something about that rang hollow for me. You know, all my friends are talking about these fancy cars and, you know, they're working crazy hours, they're partying crazy, and it was just a path of crash and burn, which in 1999 or 98, you might not have thought that it's going to be crash and burn because you hadn't seen the crash at that time. But there was just this feeling in me that this is not it. And yet there was all this potential. So I looked at the Silicon Valley, I looked at myself, and I said, yeah, I have a computer science degree, I also had a philosophy degree. And how do I use my skills for social benefit? And as we started doing this, 4 of us went to a homeless shelter and we said, we'll help you build a website. No agenda, we don't want our brand, we don't even know what it means to start an organization. We're not interested, we just want to help you. And it felt so good. We came back home, we told our friends, hey man, there's something about this giving thing, you know. And all of a sudden we they said, all right, we'll try it too. And bit by bit, it was so counterculture that it was covered all over the media. First time on TV was half-an-hour live interview on CNN International. And, you know, we are just kind of like misfits. And it's like, yeah, you always wonder how you get on CNN, right? And it turns out they just send you an email. So it was, you know, we just kind of had, we learned a lot along the way. And the questions, we started by building websites, and it just kind of changed. We really didn't want to compromise on this thing that's on postage stamps, which is love. You know, which was that, like, at any cost, we don't want to sacrifice the spirit of service that brings us all together. And it turned out that you could organize in a very different way. At that time, we didn't know it because we hadn't seen things like the Arab Spring, where there's no center, there's no funding, there's no leader, and yet it creates seismic impact in the world. And we just did that for service. We just did that for bringing people together, for serving other people. And the question that I think that stays with me is, how do you learn to value? There's a famous quote by Oscar Wilde. He says, we have a price for everything, but we don't know the value of anything. So how do you learn to value as a culture? How do you learn to value things that don't have a price? Your mother's love does not have a price. The 9 months she gave you as an unconditional gift, no price. Professors' teachings do not have a price, as much as we charge 40 grand for education these days. There are so many things, a piece of art, a small act of kindness. These things don't have a price, yet there's an incredible impact that it has in the world. And how can we create the spectrum of value generation that honors other things too, but also includes the priceless? You know, so that's been my inquiry. I don't know if I have an answer to it, but I continue in fervent pursuit of it. So,
thank you very much. So one of the things that I'm sure all of you sort of took away from the discussion from the 4 people on the panel is that each of them have this sort of inner desire to do something, make change, create transformation, have impact. So we'd love to hear from you in no particular order. Maybe we'll go the other way. Where you are today in your organization, what you're doing, is there one thing or a couple of things that stand out that frustrate you? That they're just broken, that need to be fixed?
Just one.
Yeah.
Would love to hear, if you could change 1 or 2 things, what would they be?
sure. I feel like if we have 7 minutes, I want to give that time to you guys. I mean, I have many frustrations. Don't get me wrong.
So I think in some ways the frustration is the flip side of what I love and am happy about. Is that once you've seen, in the case of what we do, ways that you can take either people's investment portfolios and have them, instead of just making money and just making money, they can make money and actually have an impact and support these organizations. Once you've seen that, see how it can work, that it can work, what it does, it's hard to imagine anything else. And the things that stand in the way of that, some of which are really boring and really prosaic, is that the head of research at a large private bank has not approved these investments, right? I mean, there are all sorts of things that stand in the way, or just habit. At large foundations, the staff is just, that's not what they look at, it's not what they think about. And that in spite of the fact that once you've sort of seen that it works, and I'm sure in all of our work, kind of once you see that, once you see what works, just the grotty process of transforming all this infrastructure and getting it to work at scale, which often is about dramatic transcendence of each of our own organizations and own work. Once you've learned something, you want everyone to know it and everyone to do it. And I think that's that frustration is, and I think for me, and probably applies to most of us, is the thing that allows us to know those things and have that insight about that it can work and how it can work is because we're doing it. We're spending every day doing it, and it's hard work and it's exhausting, and that means we don't have the time to share it, right? That if we had all the time to share it, we wouldn't be, and I think that for me is that frustration.
So both Sama Source and Sama Hope are 501c3 nonprofits, and I decided to form Sama Source that way, though theoretically it could be a business, because I always wanted the social mission to uncompromisingly be my number one priority. And there are many opportunities I would have to not hire the poorest people, to go after middle class people and just basically form another outsourcing company. And at the time when I was looking for funding, a lot of the venture capitalists I talked to said, you know, I'll fund you, but what's this business about hiring people from slums and investing all this money in training? That doesn't make sense. So, you know, if you discard that part of the business, it seems great to me. And you know, so I decided to become a nonprofit. I will say that the chief challenge I face is not attracting any capital. Last year, Sama Source was very fortunate. We raised close to $10 million, some of it in multi-year grants for the next 5 years, so we're actually in a very stable place financially. But it's attracting smart capital. Most of my funding comes from very restrictive multi-year grants that literally require me to report in the grant application how many pencils I'm going to buy in 2016. Could you imagine running an effective business that way, where management doesn't really have the freedom to make decisions that it needs to make based on how the market evolves and based on what you learn as you go? It's the opposite of the lean startup model, right? It is the clunky, bureaucratic, stupid startup model, for lack of a better word. And and a lot of our funding comes from amazing, very reputable funders like the Rockefeller Foundation. I will say Google is much better at this. They're much less restrictive, but very few grant-making organizations really trust the nonprofits they invest in to make good decisions. And so I'd say my biggest challenge is just getting those funders to realize that what they're really investing in is a good team. If they don't believe in us as a team, they shouldn't be putting their money into our organization. And if they do believe in us, then they shouldn't be asking us what we're going to do, down to the penny in 3 years' time, as it just doesn't make sense. So I will say, if any of you are involved as donors, one thing that the sector really needs are more donors who do their due diligence. So take a lot of time to figure out what you're going to fund. But once you decide to back a social entrepreneur, work with them to have a common vision. But I will say there's so much room for donors who get that, and who get that unrestricted capital allows entrepreneurs to do the right thing.
Same thing is true on the investment side as well.
Mm-hmm.
So before I kind of answer your question directly, let me step back and say for taking a technology to scale, to solve a problem, usually on a faraway continent in some corner of the world, it takes a fair amount of diversity of skills to get there. And you have to do the boring, meticulous, careful, technical work, of course, to figure out what is needed, and that you can't do it in the basement of your lab because you got to be listening to the customer. So there is iterative learning process. But then there are different skills needed. You need to understand what's the political economy of poverty, of that particular problem you are trying to solve. Usually you go somewhere and find out that people are living in dire poverty. There is also a self-reinforcing political economy of poverty. That is to say, there are interlocking pieces of people who may be benefiting from that stable mode of existence for very poor people, but then there may be some gundas, or there may be some thugs, and there will be some smuggling operations, or there will be some illicit operations going on, connected with maybe some corrupt officials or some corrupt politicians. So life is a lot more complicated than it looks from just taking the physics viewpoint, in other words. So, however, if I want to do just the invention side of it, then I can't be paying attention to these other pieces, which means that I must have partners who are savvy in terms of the pieces which are equally complicated, which require equal due diligence and integrity and passion about solving the problem, but they are good at doing those other pieces. And to me, what has been hard work, and fortunately it has been successful in a handful of cases leading to very large impact, is to figure out partners with whom to work, who can be trusted, who have similar alignment of final outcome, but who have strengths in areas where I have weaknesses. So that complementarity of somebody who understands how to put a self-sustaining model to go to scale to impact 10 million lives, to improve 10 million lives and plus, how to make it work in spite of the corruption and the crime and the thuggery and the almost Dickinsonian interlocking misery of exploiters and exploited that happens in those areas. How do you make this all work? That requires the connecting to other pieces, and that's been, if you will, the piece which is difficult. It's possible, obviously, but it's something that I would make it easy somehow.
Well, thanks so much. The red flashing light tells me we're out of time, but I wanted to thank all of you for your participation, and hopefully all of you walked away with some insight, inspiration to think differently about what you're doing, and find ways where you could be, think about social entrepreneurship. If you're an entrepreneur, think of ways you can get involved with social enterprises, and again, feel free to stay later, and we'll be happy to chat tomorrow.
And do a small act of kindness, there's a smile card here.